Hello, good evening and welcome from Bedstead Junction. Tonight we're going to feature locomotives by 4 different manufacturers. In fact, the theme's going to be mainline, Hornby, Lima and Dapol. And we've got examples of each of these manufacturers' engines or trains. Now, the first train we're going to look at is going to be by Lima, and it's the Lima rail car. These ran from about the 1930s into the mid 1950s, and then they were later replaced by diesel multiple units. I bought this one about in the mid 1990s, I'd say, so that's how long I've had it for. What we're going to do is we're going to reverse it out of the station over there, and here it comes. Lima. Go. And we'll change the points, and then we'll send around for a few circuits. Now, Lima produced modern railway equipment up until around about the year 2004, and from then on in, I think they went into administration, and then they were absorbed by Hornby, or at least the tooling went to Hornby. And in fact, a lot of the tooling is I think is being used in the Hornby railroad range. I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the warship diesel locomotive is in fact closely related to the original Lima tooling. And these were seen a lot on the western region of British Rail. As you can see, is in British Rail green. In my opinion, quite a nice little model. Always been a pretty good runner. You can in fact still buy spares for these. And I bought a replacement front bogie enclosure. It's got a sort of a motor inside similar to a Ringfield motor. And we'll pull it over just for a closer look. There we are. Now, please excuse the lighting and everything else, but there we are. The Lima railcar, GWR railcar. They were originally in chocolate and cream colours when they were originally built. And I think this is the Mark II version. They're more angular in lines. In fact, there is another earlier model, I think, which was nicknamed the Flying Banana. And it looked a bit like a banana, I will admit. But there we are. There's the Lima. It's got quite a few details on, considering it's an oldish model. You've got the windscreen wipers on there. You've got some cab detail. As I say, it's been a good runner ever since I've had it. That's all I've done basically. Is I got it down during the lockdown and oiled it. But it's always run perfectly well. And this is why this is all down, because of the lockdown. My modern railway went up into the attic because of lack of space. As you can see, this has got to go on top of the bed. Okay, so it's about the only place in the house I can put this up, and in fact this will come down later on tonight in order for me to get some sleep. So what we'll do is we'll run the Lima rail car into its siding, and then we'll take a look at the dapol now, or dapol. We'll just move the point again. I don't have electric points. I mean, on a small layout like this, I probably won't do that, but I will paint the baseboards at some later date, just to make everything look a little bit more presentable. Okay, so here we go. So now we're going to be looking at the Dapol 14XX and an auto coach. Just bear with me just 1 moment. I need to get around. Movement is quite restricted in this room, I'm afraid, so I have to make the best of it. And now we'll just run her back. Out of the junction there. The 14XX. Now these were seen over almost all of the British Great Western region, over the Western region of British Rail and the Great Western region. And they continued on till the early 1960s, I believe. Where these could be seen, were local to me, was on the Clevedon branch. I actually live in Keynsham, but it was on the Clevedon branch, which ran from Yatton to Clevedon. Now, the auto coach is an interesting vehicle in that it enables the driver to operate the locomotive from the cab end. Hence why there's a bell on the on what would be the front if it was going in sort of the reverse direction. The idea being that it would save time of the train running round going in out of a terminus like Clevedon. And in fact, we'll talk a little bit more about Clevedon later on, because we have a locomotive which relates to Clevedon in many ways. What we'll do is we'll go around and we'll see what we can do now. So now it's quite in order for it to go round this way. So if anybody should say to you, oh, it's running back, say it's running backwards. No, it's not. In fact, it's come out of the station and now the driver is at the front end of the coach. We have a small derailment there. Unfortunately, some of these locomotives have been and coaches have been in the out of use for some considerable time, so you'll have to excuse us any misdemeanors on the tracks. And as a matter of fact, it's gone quite badly there for us. I think I know why. It's my fault. I have committed a schoolboy error, much your mirth and merriment. I forgot to change the point. A schoolboy error. Too busy chatting to remember that I didn't change the point. Just there. And so obviously the old train derailed. So this is completely live, so as I'm recording it, so and it will be unedited, so you will see any of my disasters. I will talk about a disaster which occurred earlier in the week, or late last week, let's say. Right now then, the 14XX is an 042 locomotive, and it's in BR black. Now this would have been from 1948 to 1956, and then after then they came out in lined green. Now there was a little bit of a funny, I don't know what you can call it, a dispute, but certainly a question asked after Airfix stopped making locomotives. In fact, this Dapol is very, very similar to the Airfix 14XX. The mechanism's different, but the actual shell, I would say, is probably identical to the old Airfix model. And that's that Dapol bought out the name of Airfix, where they thought that they actually had the right to carry on producing the coaches and everything else. I don't think they did. In fact, what happened was, if you look inside a replica railways box or some Batman boxes, there's a little slip of paper in saying that they owe it all to dapol or something like that. I don't know. But this is a funny one because all of my other auto coaches came in a Airfix box, blue Airfix box. But this one came in a dapol or dapol box. I don't know how many came out in the dapol box because, like I say, I don't think dapol actually had the right to take over the production of the coaches, or be named on the coaches. So anyway, well, that's a little bit of history. If I'm wrong, then please, I do stand corrected. Now you'll see it's quite a smooth runner, the dapol 14XX. And we'll stop her just here and we'll have a quick look at her. There we are, 14XX. Now we'll come back a little bit. 042. So it's got no leading wheels, 4 driving wheels and 2 training wheels under the cab. I don't think it's got cab windows, where a lot of locomotives didn't back then. But a lot of people say online that it's a much better runner than the recent Hornby ones. So I mean, this is something which obviously came from the mid 1990s when I bought this. I think it cost about £47 when I bought it in the mid 1990s. So with 1990s prices, it was quite an expensive model. But as you see, it's a very, very good runner. I've only ever had to make one minor adjustment to it, and that the one of the contacts towards the back wheels wasn't making proper contact, so I just had to bend the contact out just a little bit. As you can see, very good little runner here. We'll go around one more time and we'll bring her in. So what she'll do is she'll actually drive into my little terminus station over there. Okay, so again, we'll change the points. I must remember to change them back again when I run the other locomotives. So there we go. And we'll make sure we're running in the right direction. There we are now. Fantastic. There we are now. Very good runners. In fact, these auto coaches are quite nice too. Let's say they come in Airfix branding. Now, just to save a derailment, we'll make sure we change the points. There we are. And we're going to take a look at these other two locomotives now. Mainline and Hornby. I bought this mainline locomotive. Actually purchased it online on the 28th of December 2020 and it arrived on the 31st. Now I was able to tinker with it and get it running. It was advertised as an erratic runner, an unsteady runner, but I've given it a good service, cleaned it up. In fact, I think a lot of the trouble was with these, they're a split chassis locomotive and the motor wasn't making adequate contact with the chassis. That's how the motor actually receives its electricity. Now these are both by the same designer. If you're talking about the real locomotive, George Jackson Churchward, who was the predecessor to Charles Benjamin Collett. Now you see they're similar in many ways. In that the cab has no side windows. You can see there, no side windows. And it's got those small cutouts at the back. They're both very, very similar cabs, as you can see. They're both in BR black. In fact, the Great Western locomotives were painted in this colour again from 1948 to 1956 after nationalisation. And the early crest, I think, was called the Cycling Lion or the Unicycling Lion. You can see that on both locomotives. Now, behind the mainline locomotive is mainline, or at least mainline origin coaches. The rear coach is a mainline, and the front two coaches are by a company called Replica Railways. when mainline ceased production in 1984, a lot of their stuff was briefly marketed as replica railways before the name was changed finally to Bachmann to give everything more of an international appeal. Now, mainline ceased production in 1984 when the parent company Palitoy decided that they wanted to concentrate on other areas of the toy market, which they saw to be more profitable. Hence, that's what happened there with mainline. Mainline did not go bust. They were basically were sold off by the parent company. The other locomotive we'll have a look at later and we'll discuss in more detail. And what we're going to do now is we're going to check the points. I'm going to see if we can run our mainline locomotive and coaches. So we'll move the points now. I'll make sure they are in fact going in the right direction. And we'll talk about the locomotive in more detail as well. Now, probably as you saw it when resting in the station, it's a 260 locomotive. It's going to need the hand of God because it stopped briefly on the point. There we are, no problem with that. Okay. Now, before you judge these locomotives too harshly, or some of this stuff too harshly, bear in mind, most of this stuff is at least 20 years old or more. And this one is, in fact, would have been obviously no later than 1984. And in fact, when it gets going, it runs rather well. It sometimes needs a little bit of warming up. It's still there on the point, but that may have been just down to my bad driving. So now they're a little bit noisier than the modern locomotive, but then again, you're judging it by the standards of the 1980s. In fact, they were very much leading away in good detail on locomotives. The split chassis construction came under some criticism later, but I think a lot of people are again judging them unfairly. One thing that is said to happen on these is the axles they can give out, because they have to have plastic insulation for the actual axles, and then the wheels are put onto the plastic axles. They can sometimes fail where the actual axle, where the wheel slips around on the axle and the quartering goes out. In fact, that happened to one of mine, but not this one. It was a manor class happened on. But you can buy the replacement axles for these now. And once you've got the hang of quartering, and what I would do is, if you are quartering, just copy what's on another locomotive. If you've got another locomotive that's running well, copy out how the wheels are arranged on there. And I'll talk about a little bit about quartering when we're stood still again. You'll see it runs rather well. It was rather hesitant when I first got it, and also it was derailing on points. Now, it did suffer a spectacular crash on the first and second day due to the front bogie derailing, and it basically came round the corner at speed up at the top and flew right off the tracks and down onto the floor. But it survived in one piece, nothing fell off, and so to me that's I wouldn't recommend you do that to your locomotives. It does in fact indicate that these are well made, well put together, they won't fall apart. The coaches, as we said before, the brake coach, so the one at the back, is by mainline, and then the front two coaches, the composite coaches, are by replica railways. And if you compare a mainline coach and replica railways coach, and I dare say a backroom coach of that era, they're all identical. No differences in them whatsoever. So we'll stop the locomotive here now. We'll have a closer look. Bring her in just a little bit there. There we are. That looks good. You can see what we're talking about with the 260 wheel arrangements. So you've got the 2 front wheels leading, 6 driving wheels, and no trailing wheels in BR black with the early crest. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Now, I paid very little money for this locomotive, and I'm very, very delighted with it. We'll take a look at the coaches as well. They're in BR maroon. Well, they're call it 60-foot coaches. This is what it says on the box. There, look at that. Now we're going to run it around one more time. Maybe a couple more times. I was so pleased to get this one running well. I mean, it was hesitant. It did go through a period of time as well. When I first bought it, it wasn't running at all. I thought, oh no, but it was something which probably happened to it while it was in transportation, because like I say, in the end what I had to do was loosen the screws for the pod motor which sits on top of the chassis, and I loosened the screws, gave it a wiggle, tightened the screws back up again, and it's been working fine ever since. So I think there was just a bad contact between the motor and the chassis. In fact, by the main split chassis, let me give you an idea about how it works. There's 2 large plates basically that forms each half of the chassis. There are plastic insulators between the halves of the chassis. The axles are insulated as well, and the current goes through from the track up one side of the chassis, through the motor, back down the other side of the chassis and onto the rail again. So in fact, when you open one of these up, there are no wires at all. Makes things really easy if you have to do any servicing or work. The chassis does have to be split to take the motor out, but you can still buy brushes for these and springs. And in fact, I keep spares now. So there we are. That's a lovely Mogul, Great Western Mogul in BR black livery. Now we'll pull up there. Now we'll just change the points once more. And we'll see if we can move this one into the station. And again, it stopped on the point. I apologise for the and my knocking to the rail there. There we go. I'll bring her in. I don't like to come in too fast with this particular one, because these on this particular set of points, the coach has got a tendency to derail. I'm going to have to give it the hand of God to bring her in, I think. Oh no, turn the light. Perfect. As you can see, it's still a little bit edgy on there. It's down to the track. I mean, that's not the fault of the locomotive. That's that. I've got to put this track out every day, put it away every night, and sometimes a few fish plates go a little bit loose. But you managed to see it. I did say you would see these running sessions, warts and all. So these sort of things can happen. We're going to move this one up forward just a little bit. You will see improved running for these. Now, we'll talk about the last locomotive, last but not least. So I'm going to set the points for it now before I start to talk, so I don't get too distracted and cause another pile up. Now, Hornby. This one was made in about 1991. It's a tender-driven locomotive, and the one thing it's got in common with our 14XX by the name, I mean, or where this 14XX would have run, or some of them, was on the Clevedon branch, between Yatton and Clevedon. And in fact, this locomotive was called Clevedon Court. Unfortunately, it was scrapped in 1953. It nearly got to preservation. It nearly did, almost, but not quite. And the story has it that the owner of Clevedon Court, that's a mansion just outside of Clevedon, wanted to purchase this locomotive and have it transported to Clevedon Court to put on display. And circumstances sort of went against that happening. Circumstances conspired against it. But in fact, the nameplate, which you can see there, Clevedon Court there, that's actually kept at Clevedon Court itself. So it does maintain an association, but like I say, the rest of the locomotive was sadly scrapped in 1953. I think one of the reasons why they weren't preserved, I don't think any were preserved, is that really they were in a bad way by the time they got to the end of their service life. In fact, some of them had suffered from split frames and things, and they suffered. Well, not suffered, but covered millions of miles. I think the similar St David had covered over 2 million miles. I don't know exactly how many miles Clevedon Court did. I'll have to do some more research for that. But over 1 million miles in service from the early 1900s through to the mid 1950s. So they gave excellent service. In fact, they steamed very, very well. And they were the first of the 460s. And we'll go now. Away we go. Now, split chassis was one thing I talked about, and now we're going to talk about something else, which a lot of people are against. Now, at the time when these locomotives are made, Hornby used Greenfield motors, and these were in fact tender driven. Now, what that basically means is that the motor is in fact in the tender, and the locomotive is just pushed along by the tender itself. It's not it wasn't an unusual thing. I mean, the mainline did it on their Dean Goods, and I know Airfix did it on their Castle. I used to I have Pendennis Castle in running order, and that was also tender driven. So it was just so that you could accommodate the motor inside the tender, obviously, instead of trying to cram it inside the loco. But as you can see, it's quite a smooth runner. When I bought this, I suppose you could say that this about most of my locomotives, they were a little bit arthritic. I mean, I bought this in the lockdown again, so it was made in 1991. I bought it in 2020, so quite old. Now, it's a 460 locomotive, and we'll have a look at that in just a moment. We'll talk about 460s. And this really is where the 460 dynasty began. Saints class. 460. 4 leading wheels, 6 driving wheels, no training wheels. It was decided that the 460 configuration was best. They did actually try an Atlantic style locomotive, and they decided against using that in the end. They did actually bring over some engines from France for comparison purposes, and I think they actually produced the models with the possibility of either going with the Atlantic configuration or the 460 configuration. It's a twin cylinder locomotive, this one, 2 cylinders, so it's got the large outside cylinders, no cylinders on the inside. Now, when there was more of a requirement for more power, in fact, what Churchward designed was the Star class of locomotive, and that really is a larger 4-cylinder version of this. But these could be seen all over the western region of British Rail, right up until about 1953. Now that sounds like they had a very little service life, but they in BR they had a short service life. But if you include the Great Western service, they went on. They had many years of Stirling service. Now, if you wanted to obtain the books, so you can see photographs of these locomotives in operation, then you need to look at the work of Norman Lockett. There were the photographs of Norman Lockett were produced in a book called Great Western Steam in the West Country, I think it's called. And there was also another one called Southern Steam. And he was a friend of Ivo Peters. You may have heard of Ivo Peters. He took photographs and also took colour film. And this was the thing with Ivo Peters, he took colour film. Norman Lockett was his great friend. Now, this is running really well. I'm really pleased with the way this one runs. Now the coaches which are behind it are by Hornby, and they're of about 1991 vintage as well. So they're of the same vintage as the locomotive. Now compared with the mainline coaches, which are 60-foot collets, okay, these might have some advantages for you if you decide to model the Great Western Railway, and you get hold of these. I think the numbers, I'll go through them. The composite coaches are 456, and then there's R457 and R458. You can get these still on eBay. I've seen them, and you can also get them from the Hornby Railroad version. In fact, I've got a couple of coaches which are almost identical to these in Hornby Railroad. And the main advantage is they're slightly shorter. They're shorter than my maroon coaches just here. Now that is something which you may find desirable on a small layout such as this. This layout is 6 feet by 4 feet. I was able to accommodate 4 sidings. Now please forgive some of the poor running of my locomotives. Like I say, a lot of the time though, it's not entirely the fault of the locomotives, it's the fault of the track, and the derailment earlier was caused by my schoolboy error of forgetting to change the point. So round it came, of course, clonk off it came. And in fact, if you're new or old to the hobby, and I've been in this hobby now since on and off since the early 1990s. I didn't start this hobby until I was 30 years of age, my early 30s, when I started to travel by train in connection with work, and I got an interest from that. But as you can see, that's my Hornby's Saint class, predecessor to the Star. Now there was also another locomotive which came out from Hornby, and that's St David, which is in not in BR, sorry, it's in Great Western green, in Great Western livery, and that's a lovely locomotive. I've also got that. We may have a look at that on another video. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this one into the station now. In fact, I won't change your mind. I'm going to park this over by the Aurora station over here, the country station. Okay, so that's my layout's Bedstead Junction. I'm just grateful I've got trains running. I know I've had a locomotive stalled on the siding, which is something in, all its glory for all the world to see. I had my derailment, But in spite of all of this, I find this this hobby gives me a great deal of satisfaction again. If there's one good thing about this blooming lockdown, is which has been going on and off since spring of 2020, I've had a rekindling of my model railway interest. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to wrap things up, now, and we'll just do a little recap of what we've got here. Mainline mogul 260, and over in the far station now, my country station. We'll come around here to get some better lights so I don't get any shadows on it. We have our Hornby Saint, our Lima G2R rail car, and the dapol 14XX042 with the auto coach. Okay, so now I'm going to wrap things up now for tonight and bid you farewell. And I'll say just one thing: I get a great deal of enjoyment from my model railway hobby. And if you're new to the hobby, well, please welcome to this wonderful hobby. And whatever you decide to model, and don't let anyone ever tell you you cannot run that on your layout. Okay, it's your layout. The answer I once gave at an exhibition many years ago, where somebody said, "You can't run that." I said, "We just did." Okay, so run what pleases you. If it pleases you, you can have Stephenson's rocket go around there, followed by your star if you wanted. It's your railway, it's your hobby. Okay, so I hope you get as much enjoyment of as hobby as I do. And I hope that you can find space to run your layout. Like I say, mine is on top of my bed. Okay, so I bid you farewell. Please take care during this lockdown, and hopefully we'll all come out of this and be able to go on a wonderful train journey somewhere. Thank you very much, and good night.